All right, good afternoon. Welcome to Strategic Offer Taking. So this is intended to be a conversation around writing offers, really, and some of the thought that needs to go into that, some of the questions you need to have, and also actually filling out the offer form. So I would consider this a basic class, but also for some of you, this is a good reminder to make sure that we're, filling in the fields properly, we're asking the right questions. So does that make sense? Anything additional to that that you guys might be looking to get out of this?
Sounds good.
How do I? Sorry, hold on. I'm trying to figure something out here with my little display. Okay, I think this works. You guys can still see me and still see the screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. All right. So first and foremost, communication when you've showed the property, your buyer has interest. So your buyer is now saying, hey, I would like to put an offer in on this property. What do you do as an agent first and foremost? And the biggest thing I want to talk about here is how communication is so key. A lot of times when agents will call me and they're about to write an offer, and I'll say, well, have you talked to the listing agent? Have you asked these questions? They're like, oh, no, I haven't thought to do that yet. So first and foremost, you've shown the property. Let's say they went to an open house. Let's say you booked the appointment and met them there. Maybe the agent accompanied you or didn't. And a lot of times you will get you'll get a follow-up to the showing where they'll ask for feedback, right? But what you want to do is ask really good questions, and you want to reach out to the agent. The minute you know your people may potentially have any kind of interest in this property, you need to start gathering information. You need to start getting what you need together to write up the offer and or to advise and consult with your client. Now, a couple things leading up to this conversation that I just want to make sure from a housekeeping standpoint. First and foremost, you should already have a mandatory agency disclosure, right? Because you've shown the property to these folks. So you have a mandatory agency disclosure form saying that you're representing the buyer as a designated agent. And you should also, under the new laws now, also have a buyer rep agreement. You should have a buyer rep agreement. And who can tell me what percentage that I want to put on the buyer rep agreement?
3%.
3%.
Why?
That's what we deserve to get.
Because if you ask for 2%, they can't offer 3.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
You can only get paid up to what's included on that buy rep agreement. So if you foolishly fill out a buy rep agreement for 2% and you come across a property like we're doing currently at Baldwin Crossing for offers for reservations that are going in through the end of July that are offering 3% co-brokes, but you have a buy rep agreement for 2%, you cannot take the 3% co-broke unless you get your buyer to amend that contract. And that can be a little bit of an awkward conversation to have to go back and say, oh, by the way, I'm going to make more money on this. I'm going to be the money. I'm going to make more money. Most of them are not going to agree to that, correct?
Right.
We want to make sure that we're communicating really, we've got our contracts in place. We want to communicate well with the buyer to set that expectation. And we're going to talk about how you get paid in the transaction as we go through the offer here. But you do want to be writing that buyer rep agreement for 3%. And you want to let the buyer, know that, there are a couple of different ways that you can be paid out of this transaction. But when you're reaching out to the listing agent and you're telling them that your buyer is interested in the property now, so what kind of questions are you going to ask them? Well, when does the seller want to move? What is the ideal closing date? That's going to be important, right? You know what your buyer might want, but maybe your buyer it's going to be a competitive situation. We're going to talk about the differences in these offers as we go through this today. But when does the seller want to move? What's their ideal move date? The more I meet the seller's terms and what they're looking for, the better potential I have of getting an accepted offer. Is there a seller's disclosure or lead paint form? Where would you check first before you ask the seller's agent that question? Where might the lead paint disclosure and or the seller's disclosure or any other pertinent information be residing that you could get access to quickly?
MLS.
Right in MLS. Look at those attachments. Right, look at that paper clip in MLS Pin. And if there's a seller's disclosure, download that. Make sure your buyers have looked at that because they'll want to sign that and submit that as part of the offer. Same thing is true for the lead paint form. Any house built prior to 1978 should have a lead paint form disclosure. If they're not out there, you can ask the seller's agent for them so that you have it. And seller's disclosures always available, yes or no?
No.
No, right? A seller doesn't have to fill out a seller's disclosure. Lead paint form, if it's built prior to 1978, is it always required? Yes, right?
Mhm.
Even if it is that they don't know anything because they've never tested and they just don't know anything, but that's okay. It's a disclosure form. You might want to ask the listing agent, is there anything else we need to know? Are there any other concerns from the seller side, or is there something, you know, it can be a number of things. The listing agent might point out something about the property that might come up in a home inspection, like that heating system doesn't work. Again, that should be disclosed in MLS, but you want to ask the listing agent, is there anything else we need to know before we put an offer in? And you're always going to ask, are there any other offers currently on the property? Now, I like to word that, do you have any offers in hand? Do you have any offers in hand? Why do I word it that way?
Suppositions don't count. It's gotta be a real thing. Yeah,
Then they might say, well, we're expecting 2 or 3 more. But I'm like,
yeah.
perfect. What do you have in hand? If it's a competitive situation, then you would potentially ask, is there an offer deadline in place, or will the seller review as the offers come in? Because again, this is the seller's wishes. I know the agents think they control this, but this is actually the seller's wishes or the seller's intention. Now, typically at the advice of their agent, but you want to know what's the expectation there. Because if they're going to have an offer deadline and they're not going to review anything before that, you're not going to want to show your hand too fast in that. But if they're accepting them as they come in and you have a potential to beat out the competition and take that property off market, maybe before an open house or before another offer comes in, then we would potentially be more aggressive and get it in quicker. Now, how do you think you tell if there is multiple offers on the property? Or, no, sorry, wrong question. How do you think we tell it's a competitive marketplace versus a listing? Because right now there are two types of things going on out there, isn't there? And it can be a little confusing as you go in to make offers. There are properties that are sort of hot properties, and then there's other stuff that's sitting on the market. But if something's just come on the market, how could you potentially know whether it's competitive or not, potentially, for that listing? What are some thoughts
Look
you
up
might have?
comps, and see if it's priced
Yep.
low.
Yep. Well, so looking up the comps is a great way to start. Know the market, right? And as Katie said, look up the comps. What's going on with the comparables? Is this actually priced aggressively? Because if it's priced aggressively, it is probably going to generate some demand and some action, right? And we do also want to know what that competitive pricing looks like for our buyers anyway, because they're going to ask us, where do we think the pricing is going to be? The other piece when you're looking up the comparables is, how are things in this price point and in this community performing? So are things going right under offer really quickly, like within that first week? Keep in mind, it's not going to be within a day or two because it has to go on the market, have open houses, and then they review offers. But if everything in that, let's say we're in a Needham market and we're looking between $1 million and $1.5 million, and everything I look at is pretty much going under contract within a week, what does that tell me? It's a competitive price point. And as long as this property is priced properly, then this is probably a competitive situation based on what's going on in the market. Right now, there's definitely competitive hotspots and price points, and then there's some that are not. And be careful, because some of the agents don't know what's going on out there and they think they're going to get multiple offers. And we're seeing in some places, again, depending on the property and the price point, but we're seeing some properties not really going as aggressively as we would expect, and or with as multiple offers as we would have expected potentially. So that's where asking good questions and specific questions, like how many offers in hand? Are we up against another offer? What can we do to make our offer stronger if we were to write an offer? Like what's something the seller's really making sure they need, like a certain move date or certain conditions. The better communication you have, the better prepared you are to write an offer that will get you further along. Plus, when you're communicating with the agent, what are you starting to do? Building rapport. I'm already
Connecting.
saying it right.
Building rapport, building relationships.
Yeah,
Yep,
I'm already
with that.
setting up that relationship with that agent. I'm telling that agent, I'm the person you're gonna want to work with, right? So I don't think I have to tell anybody on this call, but I'm shocked when people call me and they're like nasty or they're rude or they're right out of the gate. And I'm thinking, oh my God, like when there's 5 offers on the table, do I want to work with you? Probably not, because are we going to have this issue at every stage of the contract? Like, are we going to get to a PNS? Are we going to get to a closing table? And many times I've said to a seller, you know, I get this price, but I have concerns whether this buyer will get to the closing table based on how they've approached this offer or based on the communications we're having with them at this point. Like, those are important factors, because in the end, your job, you know, as the buyer's agent, is to get your buyer to the closing table, and the listing agent's job is to get their sellers to the closing table. And if 2 offers are really close and you were easy to work with and you wrote a clean offer and you've been, you know, respectful and good conversations and nice follow-up and been a little pleasant to work with, who do you think's going to win versus the person that's rude and obnoxious and making threats and, you know, throwing their weight around with it, like there's some, you know, like they do something. Usually I tend to find, and I think those of you that are in this call that are more experienced will agree with me, a lot of the folks, the agents that do that, it tends to come from lack of confidence. So tends to come from a lack of confidence. They just don't know what they're doing out there. So again, that's a red flag. So good communication, set up the rapport with the agent, ask good questions, because here's what's going to happen if you do that. You'll set yourself up for the ability to, if it's coming down to a multi-offer situation, let's say you are in a competitive situation and it's a multi-offer situation, and the agent comes back and says to you, we're going to do final and best. We got 4 offers on the table. We got final and, you know, we're doing final and best. You'll be in a better position to be able to say to them, listen, I appreciate that opportunity. What do I need to do to get this deal done? What do I need to do to get this deal done? Now, not everybody's going to tell you, but you'll be surprised how many of them will, especially if they like you and they want to get to the closing table with you and your buyer. And then at least you know the conversation to have with your buyer. You know, sometimes when I've done that, I'm shocked that I don't need to go as high as I thought I needed to go with the buyer, right? So don't be afraid to ask questions. They can always say, well, just do the best you can do, but it's always worth asking the question. Always worth asking the question. Any other thoughts or information on sort of setting yourself up with a communication, setting the stage? Okay. So what information do I want to make sure I gather in addition to talking to the agent before making an offer? Well, I want to make sure a couple of things. One, who we're writing the offer to is the person that can get to the closing table and sell the property to my buyers. Right? So I want to make sure that I check the deed. We want to make sure we know who owns the house. And we do that by checking, you can see it in public records and MLS PIN, but the best way is to go to the deeds, right? Go to the registry deeds in the county that the property is located in and do a search by address and look for the latest deed. Who owns the property? Is it in a trust? Is it multiple people? Sometimes people will say, oh, it's just the wife, but the husband and wife are on the deed. You need to know the husband and wife potentially may need to sign that offer in order to have a good acceptable contract. So you want to know when you get that contract back signed and accepted that it's the right parties that can sell the property. You would hate to have the attorneys now tell you after the fact, well, Mr. didn't agree to sell the house, and so you now don't have a good offer because he's not on there and he is on the deed and he would need to sign in order for something to close. So who owns the house? Pull that copy of the deed, throw that in your loop, throw that in your file so that you have that. I often look for like the assessed value and the real estate taxes. You know, the insurance stuff is different. That's if it's flood insurance. There are other considerations that we need to be concerned with, like flood insurance. This isn't typical homeowners insurance, but are there notations on the MLS about special insurance that might be needed, or taxes, or special assessments if it's a condo? Why do I care about the assessed value off the public records? Does that tell me what the house is worth? No.
No.
But it does typically, if, you know, much like when we run the pricing workshop, when we've done the pricing workshop, right, we've taken a look at the price per square foot, and we've also used the assessed value as sort of a level indicator, like, okay, in this town, for these types of houses, they're typically selling 20% over the assessed value. So it is a way, potentially, if you're running the comparables, to know, like, you know, is this in line with where it should be? If the assessed value is way lower than expected, that could be a red flag. Maybe the house is overpriced. Maybe a ton of work was done on the house and we want to make sure that we're checking permits so that everything was done properly as part of this process. You want to make sure you verify the disclosures and review the disclosures with your buyer. Do they have a seller's disclosure? What's the lead paint disclosure? Have there been improvements in the property? Are they disclosed in the MLS? So one thing, one thing I hate to have to say that this is something I have to bring to attention, but I find a lot of people don't do this. You have to read the MLS. You have to read the MLS. That's not set in stone, but that's your story of what's included, what's not included, right? We have to be careful to think about, I don't have it on here, but this is an important piece to think about. What is staying that's not a fixture? Refrigerator, washer, dryer, right? Are they included or not included? And does your buyer understand what is and isn't included? That's all disclosed on the MLS. So you want to make sure you're carefully looking at that. When was the property purchased and for what price? Again, does that tell me what it's worth? No, not really. But again, it could potentially red flag a situation, like if this property sold 30 days ago and now it's on the market for $200,000 more, or typically when I'm looking at that, I'm looking for those short purchases, like they've owned it a short period of time. Why are they selling so fast? Why are they selling so fast? And does it seem reasonable for what they may have done to work? I can look at the old MLS. If it was only a year or 2 or 5 years ago, I can look at the MLS to see, did they do huge improvements to the property? And again, now that's a red flag. I need to make sure the permits and stuff were all properly pulled so that we know what the work was done. Condition and age of the house. Like again, when you walked through with the buyers, what did they have for concerns? Did they have concerns that we want to make sure we address as part of the offer process? I mean, they might have questions and we might get those answered before we do the offer, but maybe they're concerned about a structural issue or things that they saw. And so we want to make sure they're protected with the contingencies or with special explanations on the offer. How long has the property been on the market? It's going to tell me, if it's been on for 350 days, what do I do with the pricing? Well, it's probably up for negotiation. And I don't know, I'm assuming most of you know, but for those of you that are newer, right in MLS, you have 2 things. You have property history and market history, right? Property history, if you click that, tells you everything from that address. So if it was previously listed with another agent, that's an important piece because it might be new to market right now, but maybe it was just listed with another agent for 6 months. So property history is going to show you just that, the full history on that address. Market history is going to show you under that particular MLS listing, what's gone on with that listing. Has it had price reductions? How long has it been on? Did it go contingent and then come back on the market? That's going to show me that in that market history. So there's good information there for me to be able to advise my client and assess what it is with this property. And then you're going to want to make sure you understand the local market data. Katie was talking about going and pulling those comparables so that when we know we make the offer, are we in line with the pricing? Now, there's couple of important conversations around pricing that I want to have with you, because a lot of folks will say, well, the house is overpriced. Or here's the bottom line. The house is worth what someone will pay for it. So if it's priced at $1.1 million and they get offers over $1.1 million, it was priced, it was priced appropriately, and it was priced what it was worth because somebody's willing to pay that. Just because somebody pays it doesn't mean everything in that neighborhood is going to sell for that. Maybe this particular property had something, the location, or it was more updated, or whatever that situation is that makes it worth more to that buyer. But what's the conversation we want to have with the buyer? We've pulled all the information together. We've talked to the listing agent. What's the information we want to pull from the buyer before we get into the offer?
How aggressive they want to be, because if you put in an offer at a certain price point that doesn't really line up with where the seller is at, then maybe you have potential of losing it to someone else.
Yep. So one of my favorite ways to word this question to buyers, in addition to asking them, where do you think you want to come in for price, right? Where do you think you want to offer based on what you know now, what I've educated you on, how long it's been on the market, what I anticipate for competition, what we know about the property, the disclosures, everything. When I've gone through that, at what price do you want to offer? But the key question I always ask buyers is, what is the price where you won't cry anymore if you lose this property? Right? Basically, where's your breaking point with this property? Where are you not going to care? So the property's listed for $1 million. They say, well, we wouldn't mind coming in at asking. We're okay going a little bit over, but we don't want to go a lot over. You know, they start to get wishy-washy. And by the way, why do I ask this question? Because too many people have cried over losing properties because they don't go in where they really would. Like after the fact, they'll say, well, we would have gone higher. It's like, well, I've asked that question, but you didn't do it. And now you lost the property, right? Hindsight's a beautiful thing. So I love to ask, at what price will you not cry over losing the property? So it's at $1 million. You're saying you'll go over. What's the price point that if I said to you, okay, when it closed for $1.1 million, you say, well, that's okay. We wouldn't want to pay $1.1 million for that house. We were okay walking away at that price. What's that price for you? Because that allows me to see into where the client really is. And as we start to do negotiating, and as we write the offer, and as I talk to the other agent, I have a better sense of where they will and won't go, right? I won't set them up for going too high because I know they're not gonna go up to $1.1 million, but I also can advise them at this point if they're like, well, throw $1 million on, let's see. And the agent said to me, there's 3 or 4 offers on the table. What I might say, listen, let's go in at your highest because you may not have another pass. The listing agent is not obligated in any way to come back to anybody once those offers come in. They could clear that, you know, couple things. They could accept a deal just when it comes in. I mean, if somebody could put an offer in with a tight deadline, even if the seller's saying they don't want that, and a seller could accept it. A seller could take those 4 or 5 offers that came in and just accept one of them, or a listing agent can go back and do like what we call final and best a lot of times, which tends to be on the seller's best interest to make sure that everybody is really at their top. Right? That you're not leaving any money on the table, but not everybody does that. I know some agents get disappointed because they're like, well, they never came back final and best. I'm like, that's why when you write an offer, you really should put your best foot forward because you don't know if you'll have another chance in a competitive situation. Again, if it's competitive, it's not, we got a little, you know, if the property's been on the market for 4 months and it doesn't seem to have a lot of activity, I can play around with it. Obviously, I want to balance not aggravating the sellers so they don't want to deal with us because they don't think we're serious. Right? I know some buyers will be like, well, just throw this number on it. I know it's stupid, but throw it on. I'm like, well, let's talk about that because if you really want this property, do you want to aggravate the seller to the point where they feel like you're going to be difficult to work with and they basically will say, no, thank you? Or do you want to put in a lower offer that's reasonable? So at least we open up the conversation and we get them to counter offer. It's not productive if they don't counter offer, if they just say go away, because now we haven't learned anything out of that process. Questions, thoughts, additions? Okay, so on the forms piece, and I'm going to put in the agent training channel in the Slack, I'll put this recording. I'll also put a package of the forms, and I'll also put the example form that I'm going to use in a minute. But you do have a couple of options for forms for your offer. You've got the Greater Boston Board form. Let me see if I can share my screen a different way here. So we have you seeing the Greater Boston Board form? Yes?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay.
That's the MAR one, I think.
So this is the Greater Boston Real
Oh,
Estate
it is.
Board.
Oh, okay.
So this is so there's the Greater Boston Real Estate Board one, which, you know, they're very similar. They've got the same stuff. You just want to make sure with the Greater Boston Real Estate Board, you also do the offer to purchase contingency addendum if they want mortgage contingencies, inspection contingencies, radon and or pest. And then there's a lead paint there. Keep in mind, the lead paint laws are going to change as we come up to the fall here. So we'll be talking about that difference. But that's the Greater Boston form. And then this is the MAR form that you were just talking about, Katie. This is the MAR offer form. There's not a right or a wrong. You tend to just see, I mean, the area we're in Boston, you tend to see the Greater Boston form. If you go out into the suburbs, you tend to see the MAR form a little bit more. there's not, most agents aren't going to kick it back and say you've got it on the wrong form as long as it has all the pertinent information. And both forms have the pertinent information. I personally tend to lean into the MAR because that's what I tend to see more of in the market. And I like the fact that the contingencies are included in the one form, so I don't ever forget to include the contingencies. Because I have seen newer agents go into the Greater Boston Board, forget to attach the contingency addendum, and I'll say, where's your contingencies? We don't have any contingencies. What happened there? So you can use either form. I'd say get used to one or the other and then, you know, stick with it instead of dropping back and forth between different forms so you don't mess yourself up with the forms. So let's talk about, back to here. Let's talk about the timeline. And I'm going to do this a couple of ways because I know this tends to be the challenge in the offer is filling in the offer correctly. And I want to talk about filling it in correctly and also some things on the strategic side. But I want to talk about the timeline. So I'm going to go through the timeline here with you in the PowerPoint. And then we're going to apply it to an actual offer form. Okay. Now I'm going to include for you in the Slack a filled out example. And I would suggest for those of you, I don't know if you have the ability to print out an offer form, you have one printed out, you may want to write some timeline notes on there now. That's always helpful. Or you can use the one when I load it in the Slack and download as an example to refer back to when you fill out your own, just to make sure you're filling in the fields correctly. Unfortunately, I find the offer form is probably the highest percentage form that's not filled out correctly. And the danger in that is this is your contract to purchase. So a couple of things before we talk about the timeline and writing it. This is a contract. You are putting your buyers under contract. Yes, there might be contingencies and ways for them to get their money out, but this is a contract. So we should never write an offer with an expectation that we'll renegotiate something after the fact once we have that offer in place. Because that may not be a possibility. So anything you know that needs to be included, whatever, is there negotiation after sometimes because of inspection issues or because situations change? Yes. But you should never write the offer and exclude things that you know are critically important to the deal. Because you may not have an opportunity to go back and rework that. So make sure you have everything collected and ready to go, and make sure you have all your facts before you actually work on the timeline. So what does the timeline look like? Well, day one, I'm writing an offer, right? I'm writing an offer. I'm submitting the offer, typically with $1,000 check. Now under the new forms, which I like, it says that the $1,000 will be provided once we have an accepted offer. And most of you know we use heavily now, it's Deposit Link, right? Deposit Link is the easy way to get that escrow money back and forth without having to run checks around. I don't know, for those of you that have not been in the business, we used to get in the car, go pick up the check, you know, drive the check with the offer because the check had to be with the offer even before it was accepted. Like it was a lot of running around. Then you had to get the voided check back so the check wasn't floating around. It was a lot of running around if the offer didn't go through. So it's so much easier now. But the offer, when you're putting the offer in, typically the first escrow deposit or good faith money is what it's often called, is $500, $1,000 is what you see more commonly. Could it be higher? Could be if we were trying to be more aggressive on an offer strategically and we wanted to get their attention. But keep in mind, any amount of money you put on this money and escrow money could potentially be what I call at-risk money. This could be something that the buyer could lose if something were to go wrong. So we want to be careful not advising to put, and I've seen it, people say, well, let's put $5,000 down with the offer to show we're serious. And maybe you're not doing an inspection, so there's no other contingency except to get to the P&S, right? So you're not as worried about it and you want to show them you're serious.
Where does that deposit go?
What do you mean, where does it go? It goes into the escrow account, typically of the listing brokerage.
Okay.
Or the escrow account of an attorney. Some real estate companies don't hold escrow accounts because of the requirements under them for reporting and things. And so they'll tell you that the seller's attorney is going to hold it.
Gotcha.
Buyer's attorney can hold it. Seller's attorney can hold it. Listing brokerage can hold it. buyer brokerage can hold it, but it needs to be an authorized escrow agent. If they ever say the seller will hold the escrow money, the answer to that question is absolutely not. Absolutely not. It needs to be in a special escrow account, being managed and controlled by an escrow agent. So if the offer gets accepted, we're going to hire a home inspection if we have a home inspection contingency, right? We may or may not have a home inspection contingency, but if we do, or we've set it up so we can do a home inspection, we usually get the home inspection completed within a 7 to 10 day time period from that accepted offer or from the offer going in. So the timeline here is typically that first week to 10 days, I'm going to have a contingency that says I can do the home inspection 10, maybe 7 days, maybe 10 days after. And then we're going to hire a home inspector and do the inspection in the meantime.
What are the changes that are coming with that they're gonna,
So the changes coming are that the seller, the buyer that will not have the ability to waive the inspection contingency, and the buyer cannot force them to. So a buyer coming to the table will have the right to inspect regardless. It won't be a term of the contract. It will be a right by law.
got it.
Okay. Now, the other piece I want to talk about a couple pieces in here, because there's, you've got radon inspections, right? If you want to do a radon inspection, you want to make sure that's included, depending on which contract you utilize, you want to make sure that that's covered under the contract. Because if you read the MAR one, and I would recommend that you read these, by the way. I think it's funny when I talk to people and they're like, well, I've never actually read the contract. If you're going to be advising on it, it would behoove you to read it. But, you know, the inspection on the MAR form actually says to obtain inspections of the premise, not including but not limited to home, pest, radon, lead paint, energy usage, efficiency, septic, sewer, water quality, water drainage. So it lists them out. The Greater Boston real estate form, remember you have the contingency addendum, that second page that actually has the contingencies on, which I lost my second page. Where'd it go? There it is. It has a mortgage contingency, it has an inspection contingency, and it has a separate radon contingency. So here's the important note, if you use the Greater Boston form and you have an anticipation or your buyer does want to do a radon and possibly wants to negotiate, if that radon level for Massachusetts comes in at 4.0 or higher, then you want to make sure that radon contingency is checked on the Greater Boston Real Estate Board form. The MAR form, it's already included in there. Same on the Greater Boston form with the pest inspection. It's a separate contingency. So if they have an expectation that they want to do a pest inspection and potentially renegotiate based on those results, then that needs to be checked off as a contingency. One thing I want to talk about is lead paint inspections. If the property was built prior to 1978, they will disclose on the lead paint disclosure whether they have ever done testing or not. If they've done testing, they need to report it. There's a state site you can verify if reporting's ever been done. It's been filed on the state site. You can verify whether it's been done or not. But if they know about it and they have the reports, they need to disclose it. They don't need to mitigate, but they need to disclose it. If they don't know because they never received any reports, no testing was ever done, then that's how they're going to check the lead paint disclosure form. Now, if your seller says they want to do a lead paint inspection and they want to put that contingency in, they can do that, absolutely. Keep in mind, from a seller's perspective, and again, as we go into the inspection changes, it's going to be a little different, but right now, many sellers don't want the testing done as part of the contingency. Why? They want the buyers to do it after they close on the property. Why would they typically come back and say that? Because once the testing is done, they need to disclose. Once the testing is done, they will have to disclose, even if they didn't do the testing. The testing's available, they have to disclose. So just keep that in mind. I do have buyers that have gone to properties and they have young kids and they're concerned about it. And I've just said, would you be comfortable doing the testing after knowing that, seller may or may not mitigate anyway, no matter what the results come in? Because some buyers will think, well, if I find lead paint, they have to mitigate. They don't have to do anything. It's all up for negotiation. They don't have to do anything. So if that's the case and the buyer is willing to do the work they need to do for whatever the situation is, then let them test after if that's the situation. But have a good conversation with your buyers. We typically get an attorney involved to do our purchase and sales contract, right? Massachusetts is a 2-contract state. We have an offer and then we have a purchase and sale, bearing in mind that the offer is a contract. So it should have all the terms and everything in there. You can recommend attorneys to the buyers. I would strongly, you don't have to, they can use whoever they want to use. I would strongly recommend that you have a conversation to make sure that they use a real estate attorney, not Uncle Joe that does divorces and never does real estate, because typically probably not going to protect their best interest. And I don't actually work with clients that aren't willing to use an attorney, because the amount of money that they would save, first of all, puts my liability at a much higher position because they're not hiring an attorney, right? There's more liability that's going to fall on me in that piece. And I'm not an attorney, nor can I act as an attorney because I'm not licensed as one, right? I can't advise as an attorney. So now they go without legal advice. That puts them in a difficult situation. And for those of you that have done contracts in Massachusetts, when we get to the purchase and sale, it's not just a boiler template purchase and sale. There might be a boilerplate format, but each attorney usually adds a fairly extensive list of addendums and attachments to that purchase and sale. Why? Because they're trying to help protect their client from all the things that they know could go wrong based on what they've seen in the business and in past cases. So it's not big money to hire an attorney to do the purchase and sale. And when buyers say they don't want to hire an attorney, we have a real heart-to-heart conversation about that, because I want them to be protected. I want to ensure their money's protected, and I want to ensure that their best interest is protected. You could think you've got the easiest deal on the planet about to go down. There's no issues. This is such an easy property. Everybody's happy. We don't need an attorney. Guess what? There could be title issues. Every deal can go sideways at a moment's notice. And if you don't have that attorney to help you negotiate those situations, you're going to have typically a harder time keeping those deals together, and or ensuring that your buyer is represented properly and their interest is represented properly. So they're going to hire an attorney. One other note, and I know most of you know Melissa and Scott who are here that you can refer people to. When you're writing the offer, if you have concerns, always reach out to that attorney before you write the offer. Listen, I have this concern about, we want to add any use in occupancy, or we're concerned that it's not going to be delivered in the condition of this condition, or we're concerned that this work won't get done. An attorney can always help you word that to ensure that your buyer is protected right out of the gate. If the buyer is working with a mortgage company that also works with that attorney, most of the attorneys, and I know our attorneys do this, it is less expensive for them to represent your buyer, which is different than just representing the mortgage company, by the way. But they can represent your buyer and help them do the draft purchase and sales. And it's usually done at a discount because they're getting the file from the bank to do the closing. Okay. Does that make sense?
They don't do any negotiating, right? It's just really more consulting between you and the attorney on, kind of how to frame and rewrite things, but they're not, chatting with anyone else on your behalf.
So that's a really good question. And the answer to that is typically, but a lot of times, Andre, and this is where it can be really beneficial, there are things that really need to be negotiated after we get under contract, potentially. And the attorneys can be very useful to keep all the parties calm and moving forward in a transaction if that's not the situation. I've been involved in something recently where the seller's just not that reasonable. Buyer's requests are very reasonable. The broker's having a hard time getting it through, but the attorneys were able to get it through because the seller responded better to the attorney doing it. So they could potentially be, but typically that's with everybody looped in. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. And then they're going to sign that purchase and sale within that, usually again, within a 10 to 14 day period following this offer timeline. So we've done our home inspection. If anything needs to be addressed and we need to do an amendment to the contract, we've taken care of that, or we've said, okay, we're good to go forward. And then they're going to sign the purchase and sale agreement. So the inspection contingency is typically resolved by the time I get into the purchase and sale. If there's something that is not resolved, like the radon results, or there's something we're waiting back for information, you would want to make sure the attorney had that information to include that in the purchase and sale so that it would live after the signing of the purchase and sale. And at that point, the buyers will typically put down 5%. So you can take 5% minus the 1,000 out and put that balance down at the purchase and sale. Is that ever higher or lower? It can be again. Maybe you have a buyer that only has 3.5% to come to the table with. That's okay. They might be doing 3.5% minus the 1,000 because that's all they have for cash available. If they have the cash available to put the 5% down and they only did a 3.5% mortgage and there was extra money, it would come back to them at the closing table. So this money flows into the closing. This money flows into the closing. Okay? If I have, just a quick question, if I have a buyer that's doing an 80-20, they're mortgaging 80%, do I still only put 5% down with a purchase and sale? The buyer's coming to the table with 20% 20% in cash. Do I still only put 5% down at the purchase and sale? I'm glad I brought this question up because it is the one area where most newer agents actually mess up the biggest. Is they say, oh, my buyer's coming with 20% down, so I put 20% down the purchase and sale. No, you do not need to put all their money down at the purchase and sale. They can put the balance down at the closing table because remember, what I put down with the offer and the purchase and sale could potentially be at-risk money. So we don't want to bring all our cash to the table if we don't need to. Now, again, in a competitive situation, we may make a decision to put more down, but typically this runs around 5%. And that would go into the same escrow agent the offer went into. So if the listing brokerage is your escrow agent, then that money would go over. And again, typically with Deposit Link, they would initiate the Deposit Link. I love Deposit Link. I wish we had it when I was out selling. I literally spent half my time running checks around in the car. That was literally how I spent half my time. Deposit Link is like a whole new world. And it's so much easier for the clients too. They can still do a check. One thing to be mindful of on a purchase and sale check and the offer too, but it's more important typically on the purchase and sale because of the timing. If for some reason we are doing a quick close, it's a cash deal, they've already been pre-committed, so we're doing like a 2-week close. You need to have 10 business days between the purchase and sale money going in and the closing to make sure funds clear. So if we're on the listing side and or you're on the buy side and the other way, you would want to make sure if you don't have 10 business days, that should be a bank check or a wire to make sure it clears. I think even the Deposit Link doesn't technically clear before that 10-day period. It runs, even though it acts like a wire, I think that has some issues with clearing time as well. So keep that in mind. If somebody says we need a bank check or certified funds, that's probably why. Because you don't have enough time for the funds to clear the bank before the closing, and the escrow agent doesn't want to get stuck holding a check that's no good and the property's already closed. Once we do that, once we've got the purchase and sale signed as an agent, you're going to get that now over to once it's executed, you're going to get it back to the attorneys and you're going to get it back to the mortgage broker so that they can initiate the mortgage process for the buyer. Now, on the purchase and sale signing, buyer signs first. You want to make sure you get it from the buyer's attorney so you know you're signing the right version of the purchase and sale that's agreed to. And then you would send it over to the listing agent and they would have the seller sign and then get you back an executed copy, which you would share with the lender, the mortgage company, and with the attorney. What happens next? The mortgage company initiates their process. They send it through underwriting. They initiate an appraisal on the property if that's a requirement as part of the file, right? They'll reach out to the listing agent and make sure they go out and get an appraisal done. And so somewhere between that day 28 to 35, it can be a little bit more, it can be a little bit less. If somebody's further along, the lender will issue a mortgage commitment. A mortgage commitment that says we have approved this buyer and this property and we are authorizing close. Now, you're going to have a contingency for this. And so you're going to want to make sure you monitor the dates. The attorneys will typically monitor as well, or the good attorneys will monitor that as well. But you want to monitor these dates because if you miss that contingency date, and then your buyer doesn't get a mortgage, what happens? They lose all that money they have down potentially. You can't get that money back. So these dates are very important for you to watch when you have these contingencies in place. You also want to get the commitment from the mortgage company and you want to review it and make sure there's no conditions in there. You want to make sure there's no conditions. So, let's say it's like, oh, we got a commitment, but the buyer still has to submit a paycheck or anything. You always want to follow up with that and make sure they get those conditions met so that they have a clean commitment, because once that mortgage contingency is over, again, their money's at risk. Typically, about a week before closing, the buyer will work on obtaining a home insurance binder for the closing. And again, the attorneys will keep them in line in terms of what they do and don't need to do. Most attorneys are really good at sending them, instructions of what not to do, what to do, and what the process looks like. So the final walkthrough we want to have happen as close to the closing table as humanly possible. Why is that?
Paula, just to go back a sec, so when you're sending documents back and forth, is the lender emailing back and forth between you and then you're relaying that to your client, or do they ever go direct to the client?
No, the lender will typically communicate directly with your client, and the good ones will keep you in the loop.
Okay.
Every once in a while, you got to reach out and say, hey, by the way, the mortgage commitment's in like 2 days, and where are we at with the file? Do I need an update? But the good ones, like I know when you use Andrew, you'll get a text message all the time. Your client's file has now moved to this status, or your client's now obtained the mortgage commitment, or so they stay on top of it for you. Not all the lenders will do that. Some of them you'll have to reach out and ask the questions.
That's nice.
Yeah, it is nice because it's sometimes, you get busy and you don't want to lose track of those dates. Final walkthrough we always want to do as close to the closing as humanly possible. Why?
Being face to face is always best.
Any last minute problems that
Yeah.
would have,
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, you're going to go to the closing table and you're going to sign on this property, and your buyer's going to own the property. So what if the property had a leak or a fire, or they took the refrigerator and washer and dryer and they were supposed to leave it, or now the dishwasher has broken between the time we did the home inspection and we got to the closing table? There's time here, right? Things can happen. Your job is to do a walkthrough with them and check out the systems, take a look at everything, make sure there doesn't look like anything has changed that we would need to talk about before we close on it. I just did one. I went to the final walkthrough for my son who was out of town for his friends, and there was water in the basement. There was no water in the basement before. They told us the basement was dry on the disclosure. Now we got water in the basement, right? And we've got stuff that was left in the house that wasn't supposed to be left that now needs to be removed. And so you always want to go as close to the closing as possible. So, and if there's an issue, you reach out to the attorney immediately and let them know, hey, these are the problems we have. I'm going to try to negotiate this on the other side, or make sure this gets resolved before we pass papers. In that particular case, we got them some more money back so that they could potentially resolve what was going on there. And then you're passing papers at the closing. Now, a lot of times, again, back in the day, I'm dating myself, we used to go to the closings with the clients and sit at the table with them and sign. I miss those days because it was kind of fun to see them. You didn't have a big job doing that, but it kind of made sure everything was all wrapped up. But most times now, the attorneys will meet them and just do the passing somewhere, whether it's at an office or somewhere that's convenient for the buyer. Sometimes on the seller side, they'll meet them earlier, but on the buyer side, it's typically right when they're getting ready to pass, because they need the package from the lender. They need the payoff numbers. They need the package approved by the lender. So a lot of times that goes right down to the wire. But from your side, what you can make sure happens is that the closing gets scheduled with the attorney at a time that's convenient for your buyer. So, that week before, the couple weeks before, everything looks like it's on track, reach out to the attorney. Hey, by the way, we've got the final walkthrough scheduled for 9 a.m. on Thursday, which is the closing date. Any chance you could put them in for 10 or 10:30 so they can come from the walkthrough right to sign papers with you? And then once they sign, you'll get a message that it's on record. That means they officially own the house, and then you would typically release keys to them or work to get the keys from the listing agent, or find out how you get the keys from the listing agent so that the buyers have access to the house. Keys should never be given to the buyers, or access codes or anything given to the buyers until it's on record. You don't want the liability of a buyer going in the property before they legally own the property outside of being with you or the other agent and doing a walkthrough, a licensed agent. Questions on the timeline?
Can you just repeat how long that takes from closing to when it's on record?
Usually within that day, usually within a couple of hours unless there's a concern.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, so typically they sign that day and it'll go on record. Most attorneys won't schedule anything for the afternoon for that very reason. Because the registry, you know, shuts down at certain times in terms of taking filings, so. Yep, good question, but typically on that same day, unless some issue comes up that needs to be resolved, it may be delayed and the attorneys would do an extension.
How come if you're doing a final walkthrough and everyone's there, why wouldn't you just do like the papers then? And
Because
just-
the attorney never comes to a final walkthrough typically, so
Okay.
typically that's you and the buyer.
Gotcha.
The attorney is busy in their office working paperwork. They don't have time to walk around the final walkthroughs. They're busy putting the packages together, getting everything ready so the buyers can come in and just sign.
Got it.
Good question. Okay. Helpful?
Yeah, very. Thank you.
All right, there's a couple of specifics on here. And I'm gonna switch over to the offer in a minute, but I just want to make sure property description is really critical when you're putting in an offer, that you put the full and the correct property address. Okay, and I typically reference the MLS number and or the registry of deeds and book and page of the deed is because that has the legal description of the property that your people are buying. You want to make sure you know any special provisions, so you're going to refer to the MLS sheet. Offer good until always needs a date. In order for it to be a contract, it needs a time and a date. It can't just say until presented. It needs to have a time and a date. Deposits we talked about normally held by the listing broker can be an attorney, a buyer broker, a listing attorney. It can be the buyer's attorney. It can be, if we're the buyer company and they don't accept it, we can take the escrow as an escrow agent. Make sure you pull in any riders that you need, whether it's condominiums, that they need doc review on the condominiums, septics, Title V's, we'll talk about that in a minute. You know, making sure you're referencing anything you need to pull into that contract so it becomes a part of that contract. Check or delete contingencies, typically 7 to 10 days for inspections. Mortgage dates are reversed. I'm going to show you that on the form in a second. And be sure to have your download your lead paint and any seller's disclosure and have your buyers sign them as part of the offer package that you send over to the listing agent. Okay. All right, so let's go over to the form and then we'll talk about how they get paid here. Any questions so far? Okay, again, I'm going to have all these forms in the Slack for you two to download, but so this is a fully executed sample offer that I just did out. I just want to walk it through based on what we just talked about real quick, just so you can try to take the data and apply it to the form. So who's the buyer? Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, put their names in. I also, on the seller side, I would strongly recommend that you do your due diligence, check for the deed, as I mentioned, get the seller's name. Don't just put owner of record, because again, we want to make sure from our standpoint as the agent, we're not licensed attorneys. We don't practice law. We're licensed real estate agents, so we practice real estate. You want to make sure whoever signs and execute your offer is all parties involved on the deed. So if there's a husband and a wife, or 2 people, or 3 people, they all need to sign the offer for you to have a fully executed contract. It will then say, oh, sorry, I missed a field here. My apologies. I totally missed this. Right here where my cursor is, you'll put the name of your name as a licensee affiliated with Charles Gate Realty, who you represent based on your agreements with them, you know, your disclosure and your buyer rep agreement. You represent the buyer on behalf of, and you put the client's name in here again. So your agency component is disclosed right within the offer now, which I kind of like. Never used to be in the offer back in the day. It's kind of nice. You will see a note here that this does not eliminate the requirement for you to have a signed mandatory agency disclosure form for that buyer. Why is that? Who can tell me why that is? Bonus points if you can tell me why that is. Give you a hint. When do I need to have the mandatory agency disclosure form signed with a buyer?
When they submit the offer?
Sorry, Renee, I appreciate you speaking up, but you're wrong.
Upon
Okay.
first meeting.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
first face-to-face meeting when prior to the first face-to-face meeting when I'm going to show them a property, which now also includes your buyer rep agreement. You need to not only have the mandatory agency disclosure form before you show them property that identifies how you're going to represent them. You also need to have the buyer rep agreement signed that indicates how you're going to be paid or what the expectation for payment is. Okay, so that's why this doesn't replace that, because now I'm writing the offer. I'm just disclosing to the sellers what those terms are. And I do typically with the offer send a copy of my mandatory agency disclosure form. I do not send my buyer rep agreement. It's none of their business. Okay, you do not need to provide your buyer rep agreement, your contract to the other party, just the disclosure form. What's the property they're buying? In this case, 100 Main Street in Andover. Put the full address, Andover, Massachusetts. You know, make sure if it has a unit number, it has a unit number. Be very careful with your address, what they're buying. And I like to put the MLS number here, and I also like to put the county and the book and page as a reference, which I didn't do on this example, to sort of really solidify this is the property they're making the offer on. The only issue I've seen with this over time, and it's not a very common thing, but there was a property that a agent was selling at one point, and it was a property and a lot attached to it. And they did not include the lot in the offer. And when they got to the closing table, the seller said it did not include the lot. We did something different with the lot. The buyer thought they were getting the lot as part of one package because it was in MLS that way, but there was no reference to MLS. It probably wouldn't have been sustainable anyway, but the address they purchased was the house without the lot. And so they never got that lot, and they thought that it was included in the pricing. So that's where you would want to be careful to make sure everything's included. Introduced to you by Paula Kowalczyk, Charles Gate Realty. So again, this is just your information. Make sure it always has the brokerage. The brokerage is the responsible party in these deals. So you want to make sure you always have the brokerage, not just your name. Purchase price. What's the full offer price? Here's where my deposit's going, $1,000, and I'm checking off to be delivered forthwith upon receipt of an offer acceptance, which is where it can be deposit link or through a check that I would then deliver once they have an accepted offer. And then this is the additional money to go down at purchase and sale agreement. Okay. This here, 50,000 is 5% of $1 million. So remember, not the mortgage amount, not how much money they're putting down. This is escrow money, at-risk money. And it will flow. Buyers often ask this question, well, is this addition to the 20% I need to come up with? No, this flows into the money that they already have in the transaction, and they will bring the balance to the closing table. What's your compensation? Typically a percentage here, right? I missed another field, sorry. Put in Charles Gate right here, because that's who they're paying the buyer broker fee to. And in this case, we're asking it from the seller in the offer. So there's no offer of compensation being made by the listed broker to the buyer's broker, or that offer was rejected. And which is what you're going to see more often now, because we don't have any MLS fields to put anything in. If there's a bizarre agency out there and I haven't come across any of them that was offering you, then you would make sure you separated them out between these two fields. That, you know, maybe they were offering you 2% and you're asking the seller to pay another percent, whatever that looks like. If you have a buyer rep agreement for 3% and you intend to be paid 3%, you've told the buyer it's going to be 3%. And for some reason, the seller comes back, and in this whole process, we end up at 2% on here. And so the buyer is going to come to the closing table with 1%. You want to make sure you put that down here in your additional terms so it becomes part of the contract. Okay? That, you know, additional 1% buyer broker fee due to be paid by buyer at closing. But as we've discussed, don't give up your money so fast. Listing agents are gonna come back to you all the time when you put your number in there and say, well, the seller's only offering 2%. I can appreciate that. I'm under contract with my buyer. This is how my buyer's written up the offer based on their financial situation. Please present the offer as is. Okay? You'll be shocked how many times it goes through. Listing agents are still playing like they're the gatekeepers of that number, and they're not really anymore. They're not. Nor should they really make it their business. How long is the offer good until? Make sure you're giving them enough time to review, but not too much to shop your offer. So in this case, it's the 29th in the afternoon. Maybe I make it good till the tomorrow morning because I need to get the paperwork over, get everybody to sign it, and I want to give them enough time to think about it and or for us to counter back and forth if we need to. Now I'm going to jump around here for a minute just to kind of keep it in sequence. So I've got my duration of offer, and then I have my inspection down here under contingencies, paragraph 7. So this is my inspection date. 7 to 10 days out is my next contingency. And it says deleted if waived. If you want, because it's an autofill and dot loop, I would just put waived on here if you're waiving it. Once they do the inspection, then they're going to do the P&S. So do my dates make sense? I've got a duration of offer till the 30th. I'm going to do an inspection by 8/7 and then give the attorneys a couple of days, and we're going to do the purchase and sale by 8/11. And then remember, it kicks off the mortgage. So now I've got a mortgage contingency. In this case, they're financing 80%. They're coming to the table with 20% down. So 80%. They're going to put the application in by the P&S execution. That's our second date here. So typically your official application, they've already worked with the mortgage company, but their official application goes in and they usually sign off of it with the P&S execution. And then they're going to get the commitment within that, typically like a 3-week time frame, 3 to 4 week time frame, unless you've talked to the mortgage broker and they can move that quicker if they need to. So my P&S is going to be signed by 8/11, and I'm going to have my mortgage by 9/2. And then I'm going to come to the closing table on 9/5. I always just throw 12 o'clock in here at the Suffolk Registry. These really typically take place when the attorney schedules them and where the attorney scheduled them. They don't typically take place at the Registry of Deeds anymore because the attorneys can now file electronically. They used to file, we used to sign at the Registry of Deeds because they had to file it right away. And so they would do it right there so that they could then file them, but now they can file electronically. Does this make sense? Everybody following along okay? Here's where the escrow is held by. Remember, listing brokerage company. So if it's ERA or Coldwell Banker or it's Charles Gate, you put that listing brokerage company name here as the escrow agent, or it can be the attorney's name. Typically, you'll find you'll put the listing brokerage here 99% of the time. And if you're not, the listing broker will tell you that before you put the offer in. By the way, we don't hold escrow. Please put this attorney on it because they hold the escrow when it's the seller's attorney or whoever it is. I just had one of those. The only place you tend to find those is like if you go to the small boutiques or go further out Western Mass, you come across that. Around here, most everybody does escrow. Then you've got representations and acknowledgements. Again, recommend some light reading for you before you kind of understand the context of what you're looking at there. But basically, it goes through and acknowledges receipts of a bunch of representations, the licensee disclosure, the property transfer lead notification if it applies, the home inspector facts for consumers. If there's anything else that they would need to rely on in making this offer, then you would put it here. If not, it says write none. So follow the instructions. And then in additional terms, you would reference any addendums, condominium document review addendum as attached, contingency addendum as attached if you're in that other contract, any additional considerations, seller to credit the buyer $5,000 closing cost credit. You know, there's nothing in here that really goes into like what's included, what's not included. You know, it's considered all fixtures. So let's say they've indicated that the washer and dryer are not included, but the buyer wants them, then you could add it in here. So any items included, excluded, any additional considerations, sort of, anything else that needs to sort of be relayed at that point. Use and occupancy, that they're agreeing to. Trying to think of some of the other things we put in there. There's so many different possibilities, but once you get into that language, touch base with me and or the attorney to make sure you're writing it in a way that it's clear what the intentions are and enforceable if something were to happen going forward. If they needed a contingency or an out, or we got to the closing table and they didn't leave the washer and dryer, we would have something on the contract that indicated that. Keep in mind that the purchase and sale is going to replace the offer form. So you're going to also want to make sure when the P&S is signed and your client's getting ready to sign it, that you review a couple of pieces of that. You're going to want to review the commission to make sure the correct commission is following through. You're going to check the commission date, the contingency of dates to make sure that the right contingency dates follow through on the contract, and any other these types of concerns like, oh, they were really concerned about the washer and dryer. I want to make sure that's in the P&S. Because if they were really concerned about it and it doesn't get in the P&S, whose problem is that going to become? Who's buying a washer and dryer at closing? You, not the attorney, you. So we want to make sure you just double check. The attorney only has the information you provide to them. And so the better communication you do with the attorney, and then just cross check it to make sure something didn't get lost in the shuffle. And then your buyer signing here down below. And then the seller will accept from here. Questions? It's a lot of information.
I have a question, but I don't know if this is the right time on that. It's more kind of what are you seeing in this marketplace? Maybe more so out in the suburbs in terms of offers asking for credits at closing, or over paying overpriced, but saying subject to you giving me XYZ. Are you seeing?
We're seeing, so those are typically called seller's concessions, and we're seeing a lot of those in offers. A credit back so that they can buy down the interest rate, or they can pay for their closing costs so that they can, do more with it, or they can take care of something they need to take care of the property. You are seeing more of that.
Okay.
You're seeing quite a bit of that in the city and out in the suburbs. We're seeing quite a bit of that. We're seeing a lot of it in the new development side.
Right.
Good. So make sure you're clear with your offer. When you're new for certain, although I'll always review them, make sure you reach out. I can get into .loop and take a look at it. So before you have your buyer sign, reach out and say, hey, listen, we just take a quick review. I'll ask you some questions to make sure you've included everything that you've needed to include it on the offer. And then you can have your buyer sign it. I hate to have you have the buyer sign it and then you have to go back because I'm saying, oh, your dates didn't line up right. And unfortunately, it would be nice if the offer flowed in the way that the transaction flows, and it doesn't, right? The way the contingencies are. That's why I just showed it to you and kind of moved around into the flow. So just kind of read the paragraph you're in, check your dates, be careful with what's, what's in there from the timestamp, and then make sure they make sense. And that's something I can always do for you before you actually have them sign it and submit it. And then when you're putting your offer into the listing agent, you are going to want to put it into one document. It could be multiple forms in .loop, but you're going to want to click them all and make one PDF, and it should include the offer form, any contingency forms if they apply, the buyer's either proof of funds and or pre-approval letter, and your mandatory agency disclosure form. And then if applicable, a lead paint disclosure form, and if they've done one, a seller's disclosure form that your buyers have signed. And then you would submit that to the listing agent as one package. Good? Helpful? Did you learn things today? I haven't seen most of your faces on here all day. Renee's there smiling. I can see Renee smiling.
Very helpful.
It was very
Any-
helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. When in doubt, ask questions, because it is a contract. That's probably the biggest thing I can stress today is don't, when in doubt, ask questions, because timing's important, fields being completed is important, and we want to make sure it's as accurate as possible as we go forward so we don't run into an issue down the line. Because I've had agents go, well, I just had to get the offer in, but now we can fix it. I'm like, No, you're under contract. You signed a legal binding contract. So we want to make sure that that those terms are correct because they don't have to renegotiate anything. Okay, well, it's a whole nother class to go through negotiating strategies and how we break down those numbers and stuff. So we will do that as well. And just, you know, from the showing property standpoint, again, make sure you keep in mind when you're showing the property with them that you may want to make an offer on the property with them. So what information do you need to get while you're in the property? Just think about that for all the showings when you're going through your showings. And you should be good to go. And do your homework, don't rush it. Do your homework. I would suggest after this, for those of you that have never written an offer, take the forms, you know, that I put in the thing and do like a practice scenario, and or keep the one that I have with the dates, or make your own. A lot of times new agents have made their own, like the 7 to 10 days out. What I love the most about .loop is you don't typically have to do this right in front of the buyer and fumble. You can ask them a bunch of questions about their preferred closing date and things like that, and then you can put the offer together for them and send it over for electronic signature. But when I was a new buyer's agent, we didn't have that. I would pre-fill out the form so I wouldn't look stupid sitting in front of them. And then I just adjust it if I needed to adjust it. But because I was so afraid I'd mess up the dates because they're a little tricky. It's not super easy. All right, guys, appreciate you joining me. Thanks for hanging in there. Any questions, let me know. Any offers to review? Again, happy to let me know any day or time. I will check texts and I will look at the files in .loop and stuff over the weekend. So don't ever hesitate.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you. Bye. Bye.